The Napa Valley sun was doing its best to convince me that everything was perfect. At $85,000, it certainly should have been. I stood at the edge of the polished oak dance floor at the Meadowood Resort, my tuxedo collar feeling like a noose, watching the way the light caught the bubbles in my vintage Bollinger. Around me, the cream of San Francisco society, or at least, the people Michael Bradford wanted us to believe were society, laughed and clinked glasses. My daughter, Amanda, looked like a dream in a Vera Wang that cost more than my first 3 cars combined. Beside her, Michael radiated the kind of practiced, high-gloss charisma that usually comes with a predatory lending license. He was a young millionaire, a fintech disruptor, with a smile that was just a fraction too wide to be sincere. Everyone admired them. People kept coming up to me, slapping my back, telling me how lucky I was to have a son-in-law who was going to take the Smith family into the next century. I'd spent 40 years in the art world, long enough to know when a brushstroke was forced and when a signature didn't quite match the hand that supposedly wrote it. But for Amanda's sake, I had kept my mouth shut. I'd played the role of the doting, slightly befuddled retired consultant from the Richmond district. I didn't know it then, but the perfect life Michael had built for my daughter was a house of cards, and I was the one holding the match. The band shifted into a slow, melodic jazz standard, our song, the father-daughter dance. As Michael handed her off to me with a wink that made my skin crawl, I took her hand. It was ice cold. Amanda had always been a girl who wore her heart on her sleeve, but today she was wearing a mask. We began the slow rotation expected of us, 200 pairs of eyes tracking our every move. I leaned in to tell her how beautiful she was, but before I could speak, I felt her fingers dig into my shoulder with a desperate, bruising strength. "Dad," she whispered, her voice a ragged thread that didn't match the frozen smile on her face. "Please, don't let go." I felt a sharp edge slide into my tuxedo jacket pocket. It was a small, heavy envelope. Her eyes met mine for a split second, not the eyes of a happy bride, but the eyes of someone drowning in the middle of a party. "Dad, please help me," she breathed, the words barely audible over the saxophone. I kept dancing. I kept smiling. I've spent my life maintaining a poker face in auction houses where millions were on the line, and that training was the only thing keeping me upright. I finished the song, kissed her forehead, and walked with measured, calm steps toward the restroom. My heart was a jackhammer against my ribs. I locked myself in a stall, my breath coming in shallow hitches, and pulled out the envelope. The stationery was from the hotel, the handwriting hurried and shaky. "Dad, help me. 3 days ago, I overheard Michael on the phone with his sister, Jennifer. He said he's only marrying me for your money. He called me an easy target. He told her that as soon as the honeymoon is over, he's going to convince me to put you in a nursing home so he can get full guardianship of your estate. He said you're an old fool sitting on a gold mine you don't deserve. Dad, I'm scared. I think he's already done something to my accounts. Please stop this. Please don't let him take me away." I read it twice. The air in the restroom felt like it was thickening, turning to lead. In the mirror, the man looking back at me wasn't the boring and safe retiree Michael Bradford thought he was playing. The lines around my eyes hardened. A cold, familiar, predatory instinct, one I'd buried 15 years ago for the sake of a quiet life, surfaced like a shark in dark water. Michael Bradford thought I was a pensioner with a tidy little nest egg. He saw my modest house in the Richmond and my old Volvo and thought he'd found a soft mark. He didn't know that those old stamps he'd mocked during dinner were worth more than his entire fraudulent startup. He didn't know that the consulting I did was for the highest levels of Interpol's art crimes division, and he most certainly didn't know that he had just threatened the only person in this world I gave a damn about. I folded the note, tucked it into my inner pocket, and straightened my tie. When I walked back into that reception hall, the music sounded different. It sounded like a funeral march. I spotted Michael at the bar, holding court with a group of his investor friends, men in rented tuxedos, who smelled like cheap cologne and desperation. His sister, Jennifer, was beside him. She was the one who had generously handled all the vendor contacts for the wedding. She was the one who had insisted on the $85,000 budget, claiming it was essential for Michael's image. Old man's money well spent, right? Michael's voice carried over the crowd, fueled by top-shelf whiskey and the arrogance of a man who thinks he's already won. "At least the free booze is better than that swill he usually drinks. I give it 6 months before I have the keys to the kingdom. Amanda will sign anything if I tell her it's for our future." His friends laughed. Jennifer smirked, tapping the side of her champagne glass. I stood 10 feet behind them, hidden by a large floral arrangement, watching the vultures celebrate a meal they hadn't even killed yet. I looked across the room and saw Amanda. She was standing by the cake, her hands trembling so violently she had to clench them behind her back. She was looking for me. She was waiting for her father to do what he'd always done, fix it. I didn't go to her. Not yet. Instead, I walked straight to the stage. The lead singer of the jazz band looked at me, confused, as I reached for the microphone. The room was buzzing, the energy high, the millionaire groom laughing at the bar. I tapped the mic. The sound echoed through the rafters like a gunshot. Silence didn't just fall, it crashed. 200 faces turned toward me. Michael froze, his glass halfway to his lips. Jennifer's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of sharp, instinctive fear. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice projected with a clarity that surprised even me. "I'd like to make an announcement. A correction. Really." I saw Amanda's eyes widen. I saw Michael start to move toward the stage, his public smile sliding back into place, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "James, hey, big guy," he called out, his voice tight. "Maybe save the toast for after the cake?" "This isn't a toast, Michael," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "This is an eviction notice. This wedding is over. Cancelled. Effective. Immediately." The gasp that went through the room was audible. It was the sound of $85,000 evaporating in a single breath. Michael stopped dead in his tracks. "James, you're drunk. Sit down before you embarrass Amanda." "Amanda," I said, ignoring him and looking at my daughter. "Come here." She didn't hesitate. She ran. She didn't walk. She bolted toward the stage, her heavy silk train rustling like dry leaves against the floor. I stepped down and met her halfway, pulling her behind me. "What is this?" Michael's voice was dropping the charming entrepreneur act. The mask was slipping, revealing the snarling, ugly thing beneath. "You can't just cancel a wedding. I've got people here." "I've got investors. You have a collection of frauds and failures, Michael," I said, my voice low but carrying through the silent hall. "And you have exactly 10 minutes to get off this property before the sheriff's department arrives to escort you." "I've already made the call." Jennifer pushed through the crowd, her face a mask of fury. "You're crazy. You're an old man having a breakdown. We'll sue you for every penny you have. This resort is paid for. We have a contract." "The contract is in my name, Jennifer," I reminded her. "And as for my pennies, you should have looked a little closer at the man you were trying to rob. You see, I've spent 40 years spotting fakes. And you too? You're the clumsiest forgeries I've ever seen." I turned to the room, to the friends and the investors. "The bar is closed. The party is over. Please leave through the main entrance. Valet has been instructed to prioritize the exit of anyone not on my guest list." I led Amanda toward the side exit, my arm around her shoulder. Behind us, the room erupted into chaos. Michael was screaming. Jennifer was hysterically calling her lawyer. The investors were scurrying for the doors like rats off a sinking ship. We reached my car, not the Volvo Michael expected, but a black Audi A8 I'd kept in a private garage for years. I helped Amanda into the seat, her white dress spilling over the leather like a fallen cloud. As I got into the driver's seat, I looked back at the resort. Michael had burst through the front doors, his tuxedo jacket gone, his face purple with rage. He was sprinting toward the car, shouting something about his money. I didn't wait. I put the car in gear and pulled away, the gravel spraying behind us. "Dad," Amanda whispered, her voice finally breaking. "He's going to come after us. He knows where we live. He said he has people who can make you sign things." I looked at my daughter, the fierce, protective heat in my chest, turning into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. "Let him come, sweetheart," I said, glancing at the rearview mirror as the lights of the resort faded into the Napa fog. "He thinks he's the one playing the game. He has no idea that I've been letting him win the opening rounds just to see where he hides his cards." I reached into the glove box and pulled out a burner phone I'd kept for a decade. I dialed a number I knew by heart. "It's JS, I said when the voice answered. "I'm coming back into the market. I need a full sweep on a Michael Bradford and a Jennifer Bradford. I want every debt, every lie, and every shadow they've ever stepped in. And call Jessica. Tell her the boring and safe James Smith is dead. We're going to war." I hung up and looked at Amanda. "He told his sister you were an easy target, didn't he?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "What he doesn't know I said, is that he just made himself the primary suspect in the total destruction of his own life. I'm not just going to stop him, Amanda. I'm going to erase him. But as we hit the highway, a notification chirped on Amanda's phone. She looked at it, and her face went pale. Dad, my bank account, it's empty. And there's a loan in my name for $500,000. It was approved an hour ago. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I had underestimated how fast he could move. The game wasn't just starting, I was already behind. The silence in the Audi was heavy, a suffocating contrast to the frantic chirping of the notification on Amanda's phone. $500,000. In the world of high-stakes art fraud, that was a rounding error, but to a school teacher like my daughter, it was a death sentence. She was staring at the screen, her breath coming in ragged, hitching gasps that made my chest ache. He couldn't have, she whispered, her thumbs hovering over the glass as if she were afraid to touch it. Dad, I didn't sign anything. I haven't even looked at a loan application. How did he? Electronic signatures, sweetheart, I said, my voice sounding like gravel under a boot. In this day and age, a man who claims to be a fintech genius doesn't need your pen. He just needs your login credentials and a few minutes of your trust. He's been harvesting your life for months. I kept my eyes on the road, weaving through the late afternoon Napa traffic, but my mind was already 6 months back. I was replaying the first time she brought him to the house in the Richmond. I remembered the way he'd parked his Tesla Model S Plaid, the top-of-the-line version, of course diagonally across the driveway like he was staking a claim. He'd walked in wearing a Loro Piana sweater and a Patek Philippe Nautilus on his wrist. At the time, I'd just been a retired consultant in a faded cardigan, stirring a pot of chili. He'd shaken my hand with the practiced firmness of a man who'd watched too many alpha male tutorials on YouTube. He'd looked around my modest living room with a patronizing tilt of his head, his eyes lingering on the dusty bookshelves and the old Volvo in the garage. I could almost see the calculator in his brain clicking, lower middle class, comfortable but stagnant, no threat. What he didn't see was the way the dusty bookshelves were actually filled with first edition Beckett and Joyce. He didn't notice that the old stamps on my desk weren't a hobby, but a liquid asset worth more than his startup's valuation. And he certainly didn't notice the way I looked at his watch. To the untrained eye, it was a $100,000 timepiece. To me, the JS who had spent decades identifying the most sophisticated art forgeries in Europe, the date wheel was off by 0.5 millimeter. I didn't know it yet, but that fake watch was the first thread in the tapestry of lies Michael Bradford had woven around my daughter. We're going to Jessica's, I told Amanda as we crossed the Golden Gate Bridge. The orange towers were shrouded in a thick, wet fog, matching the mood in the car. She's the only one who can freeze this before it clears the clearinghouse. Jessica Martinez had been my attorney and my closest friend for 30 years. She was the only person who knew the full extent of the JS legacy, the man who had brokered deals for Rothkos and Pollux under the cover of total anonymity. She was the one who had helped me disappear when Amanda's mother passed away, allowing me to raise my daughter in the kind of normal, grounded environment I'd never had. Amanda was still shaking. Dad, the nursing home. He told Jennifer he was going to put you in a home. He said you were declining. He's been telling me for weeks that you seemed forgetful. He said he was worried about you living alone in that big house. I thought he was being sweet. I thought he cared about you. A surge of protective fury boiled in my gut. That was his play, the gaslight special. Isolate the victim, undermine her support system, and then swoop in as the only person she can trust. Michael hadn't just wanted my money. He'd wanted to delete me from the equation entirely. He'd been grooming Amanda to become his unwitting accomplice in my own incarceration. He was planting the seeds. Amanda, I said, my voice cold and steady, if he could convince you I was losing my mind, he could get you to sign a power of attorney. Once he had that, he wouldn't even need to forge your signature anymore. He'd own everything I've ever worked for. I pulled up to a nondescript office building in the financial district. This wasn't the high-gloss glass and steel tower Michael claimed to work in. This was the real power, the kind of place where billions moved in silence. Jessica was waiting for us in the lobby, her face a mask of professional steel. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. I've already initiated a lockdown on Amanda's credit, she said, leading us toward the private elevator. But James, the loan Michael took out, it's not from a traditional bank, it's a private equity bridge loan. They don't care about fraud reports, they care about collateral. And according to the filing I just pulled, the collateral for that $500,000 loan is your house. Amanda let out a small, strangled cry. "My house?" I asked, my grip tightening on my cane. "How can he use my house as collateral for a loan in her name?" "Because," Jessica said, her voice dropping as the elevator doors closed, "3 weeks ago, a quitclaim deed was filed with the city. It bears your signature, James. It transferred the ownership of the Richmond property to Amanda. Effectively, she owns the house now. And Michael, using her credentials, just mortgaged it to the hilt." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I hadn't signed any deed, but I remembered a morning 3 weeks ago. Michael had come over with wedding permits that needed my signature for the Napa venue. I'd been distracted, Amanda had been laughing, and I'd signed a stack of papers in the kitchen while the coffee was brewing. I'd broken the first rule of my own life. Never sign what you haven't read. I thought I was the one playing him, I muttered, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. I let my guard down because I wanted her to be happy. I let a two-bit con artist into my kitchen, and I handed him the keys to the kingdom. "He's not a two-bit con artist, James," Jessica warned as we entered her office. "I've been doing some digging while you were driving. Michael Bradford isn't even his real name. He's Michael Vance. He's been involved in 3 similar engagements in the last 5 years. One in Seattle, one in Denver, and one in Scottsdale. In every case, the father of the bride ended up in a state-run facility, and the daughter ended up bankrupt. He's a professional legacy eater." The term sent a chill down my spine. A legacy eater. Someone who doesn't just steal money but consumes the entire history and future of a family. Amanda sat in one of the leather chairs looking small and fragile. "Why me? Why us? We don't even look rich. We live in a 3-bedroom house in the Richmond. We shop at Safeway." "Because Michael is smarter than he looks," I said, turning to look out at the fog-drenched city. He didn't look at the house. He looked at me. He saw the way I handled myself. He saw the art on the walls even if he thought it was fake, and he gambled that there was more beneath the surface. He wasn't looking for $1 million. He was looking for a fortune. Jessica tapped a key on her laptop, and a series of bank records appeared on the wall-mounted monitor. "He's already moved the first 100,000. It went to a shell company called Apex Innovations. From there it vanished into a crypto tumbler. He's fast, James. If we don't hit him with everything we have tonight, that money and your house will be gone by Monday morning." "Then we don't wait for Monday," I said. "Amanda, I need you to stay here with Jessica. She has a secure guest suite. Michael doesn't know you're here, and he doesn't know how much we know. To him, the wedding just blew up and he's in damage control mode. He'll think you're hiding out at a friend's house, crying." "Where are you going?" Amanda asked, her eyes wide with fear. "I'm going home," I said. "I left something in my study that Michael has been eyeing since the day he met me. My stamp collection. He thinks it's a hobby. I'm going to make sure it becomes his bait." But as I turned to leave, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an unknown number. I answered it, sensing the venom before I even heard the voice. "James." Michael's voice was smooth, devoid of the stuttering panic he'd shown at the resort. He sounded relaxed, triumphant. "I noticed you left the party a bit early. That was quite a scene you made. Very dramatic. But I think you've forgotten who has the leverage here." "I haven't forgotten a thing, Michael," I said, my voice a low growl. "Check your email, old man," Michael said, and I could hear the smirk in his tone. "I just sent over a copy of that quitclaim deed, along with a few photos I took inside your study while you were making us chili last month. You have a very interesting collection of stamps, James. I did some research. That penny black you keep in the blue album? It's a 1,840 VR official, only a handful in existence, worth about $500,000 on its own." My heart stopped. He wasn't just a con artist. He was a specialist. "Here's the deal," Michael continued. "You're going to walk back into that house, you're going to pack up that blue album, and you're going to meet me at the ferry building in 1 hour. If you don't, I'm going to call my friends at the bridge loan company and tell them to start the foreclosure process tonight. And then, I'm going to call the police and tell them that my confused father-in-law just tried to assault me at my own wedding. I have witnesses, James, my sister, my friends. They'll all say you've been acting erratic, violent. You won't get away with this," I said, but the words felt hollow. "I already have," Michael laughed. "Oh, and James? Tell Amanda I'm sorry about the bank account. But weddings are expensive and someone had to pay for the Bollinger." The line went dead. I looked at Jessica and Amanda. The room felt like it was closing in. Michael wasn't just one step ahead. He'd already finished the race and was waiting for me at the trophy ceremony. He knew about the stamps, he knew about the house, and he was ready to use my own daughter's reputation to put me in a cage. What Michael didn't know was that I hadn't spent 40 years in the art world just looking at paintings. I'd spent 40 years learning how to destroy people who tried to sell me lies. "Jessica," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Call Bob Chen. Tell him I need the investigative package. And tell him to bring his camera. Michael wants a meeting? I'll give him a meeting. But it's not going to be at the ferry building." I walked toward the door, my mind racing. I had to get to the house before he did, but as I reached for the handle, the office door swung open, and two men in dark suits stepped in. They weren't lawyers. They had the thick necks and dead eyes of professional enforcers. "Mr. Smith?" one of them said, his voice a flat monotone. "Mr. Bradford sent us to make sure you don't get lost on your way to the meeting. We'll be escorting you home now." I looked at Jessica. She reached for the silent alarm under her desk, but the second man was faster, his hand clamping down on her wrist. "Don't," he said. I realized then that Michael Bradford hadn't just been playing for my money or my house. He'd been playing for my life, and he'd just turned the entire city into my prison. What happened next would change everything. But in that moment, all I could think about was the penny black stamp sitting on my desk and the tiny, hidden GPS tracker I'd installed in the binding of the album years ago. The hunter was officially being hunted, but Michael had no idea that I was the one who had set the trap. The two men in the office didn't look like they belonged in a financial district law firm. They looked like the kind of guys who handled collections for people who didn't use banks. The taller one, the one who had his hand clamped on Jessica's wrist, had a jagged scar running through his eyebrow and a gaze that was as flat as a sidewalk. "Let her go," I said, my voice dropping into a register I hadn't used in a decade. It wasn't the voice of a retired consultant. It was the voice of the man who once stared down a Russian oligarch over a disputed Caravaggio in a basement in Prague. The man laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "You're in no position to give orders, Pops, Mr. Bradford wants his property. You're going to walk out of here, nice and quiet, and take us to that house of yours. If you make a scene, the lady gets hurt, and the girl." He looked over at Amanda, who was trembling in the corner. "Well, the girl has a very long night ahead of her." I looked at Jessica, our eyes met, and in that split second, 30 years of history passed between us. She saw the JS flicker back to life behind my pupils. She stopped struggling and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "I'll go," I said, holding up my hands. "Just leave them out of it. They don't know anything." "Good choice," the scar-faced man said. He shoved Jessica back into her chair and gestured toward the door. "Let's move. We've got a car waiting." As they led me out, I caught a glimpse of Amanda. She looked devastated, her wedding makeup smeared, the white silk of her dress a mockery of the life she thought she was starting. I wanted to tell her it would be okay, but I couldn't. Not yet. I needed Michael to think he was the one holding all the cards. I needed him to believe that his legacy eater tactics were working perfectly. We stepped into the elevator, the silence punctuated only by the hum of the machinery. As the numbers counted down, my mind drifted back 6 months to the day Michael Bradford first walked into my life. I should have seen the cracks then. I usually do. But I had been so desperate for Amanda to be happy. Since her mother died of breast cancer 10 years ago, Amanda had been my entire world. I'd watched her struggle with the weight of our modest life, never realizing that I could have bought her a private island if I wanted to. I'd kept the wealth a secret because I'd seen what money did to people in the art world. It turned them into monsters. I wanted her to grow up with a soul, not a price tag. When she brought Michael home, she was glowing. "He's a genius, Dad," she'd told me in the kitchen while he sat in the living room, evaluating my furniture. "He's building a platform that's going to democratize venture capital. He's so smart, and he's so driven." I remembered watching him through the doorway. He was picking up a small bronze sculpture on my side table, a genuine Rodin study I'd picked up in Paris in the 80s. He'd flipped it over, looked at the base, and set it down with a dismissive clunk. "Nice paperweight, James," he'd said when I walked back in. "You ever think about upgrading the decor? I could put you in touch with some people, real designers, not this flea market stuff." I just smiled and offered him a beer. I'd noticed the fake paddock on his wrist that night, but I chalked it up to a young man's vanity, someone trying to fake it till he made it. I didn't realize that the making it part involved cannibalizing my daughter's future. The elevator doors opened, and we moved through the lobby. A black SUV was idling at the curb. They shoved me into the back seat, and as we pulled into the San Francisco traffic, the psychological pressure started to mount. "You know," the driver said, looking at me through the rearview mirror, "Michael speaks very highly of your hobbies. He says you've got a real eye for the small stuff. Stamps, coins, bits of paper. It's just a way to pass the time," I said, playing the role of the defeated old man. I let my shoulders slump. I let my voice shake just a little. "I don't want any trouble. If Michael wants the albums, he can have them. Just tell him to leave my daughter alone." "Michael wants more than the albums, James," the driver replied, his voice chillingly casual. "He wants the whole set. The house, the accounts, the reputation. He's very thorough. He calls it portfolio optimization." We arrived at my house in the Richmond district 20 minutes later. The fog had settled in for real now, a thick gray blanket that made the streetlights look like distant, dying stars. My house, the sanctuary where I'd raised Amanda, looked small and vulnerable. As we walked up the stairs, the front door swung open before I could even reach for my keys. Michael was standing there, a glass of my best 20-year-old scotch in his hand. He was wearing his tuxedo trousers and a white dress shirt, unbuttoned at the collar. He looked like he'd already moved in. "Welcome home, James," he said, stepping aside to let us in. "You're late. I was starting to think you decided to be difficult." I walked into my own living room and felt a physical pang of violation. My books had been pulled from the shelves. My desk had been ransacked. The blue album, the one containing the penny black, was sitting open on the coffee table. Jennifer, Michael's sister, was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through a tablet. She didn't even look up. "The inventory is mostly junk, Mike," she said, her voice flat and professional. "A lot of mid-century prints, some bronze pieces that are probably recasts. But the stamps are the real deal. We've already authenticated the 1,840 VR. There's a buyer in Hong Kong who'll take it for 400,000 cash by Monday." Michael grinned and took a sip of the scotch. "You hear that, James? Your hobby just paid for my next 3 months of operating expenses. It's a shame, really. If you'd just been a little more cooperative at the wedding, I might have left you enough for a decent room in the home. But now we have to cover the inconvenience fees." I sat down in my favorite armchair, the one Michael had once called thrift store trash. I looked at him, and for the first time, I let the old man mask slip just a fraction. "You really think you're the first person to try this, Michael?" I asked. "You think you're the first predator to stumble onto a quiet house and assume the occupant was a lamb?" Michael's grin didn't waver. He leaned over the coffee table, his face inches from mine. "I don't think anything, James. I know. I know you're a retired consultant with a dead wife and a daughter who thinks you're a saint. I know you've got $50 million hidden in offshore accounts and collectibles because I've spent the last 6 months auditing your life while you were busy being a doting dad. You're a ghost, James, a relic. And in the fintech world, we don't respect relics, we disrupt them." He tapped the blue album. "The penny black is just the start. I want the rest of the JS collection. I know about the Basquiat you have in the climate-controlled storage unit in Oakland. I know about the Rothko you brokered for the Getty that never quite made it into the public record. I want the keys, James. All of them." I felt a cold thrill of realization. He knew about the JS name. He'd done his homework, but he'd made one fatal mistake, the same mistake every amateur makes when they try to play in the big leagues. He assumed that because he knew my name, he knew my game. "The Basquiat isn't in Oakland," I said softly. Michael blinked. "What?" "It's not in Oakland," I repeated. "And the Rothko? That wasn't a brokerage. That was a gift from the artist's estate for services rendered. You're looking at the map, Michael, but you're not seeing the terrain." Michael's face flushed red. He slammed his glass down on the table, the scotch splashing onto the penny black's protective sleeve. "Don't play games with me. I have the deed to this house. I have your daughter's signature on a loan for $500,000. I can have you committed to a psych ward by midnight. All I have to do is call the paramedics and tell them you're having a violent episode. Jennifer has the witness statements ready to go." "I'm sure she does," I said. "But tell me, Jennifer, did you check the binding of that blue album before you opened it?" Jennifer looked up from her tablet, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "What are you talking about?" "The blue album," I said, leaning back in my chair. "It's a custom piece, made by a craftsman in Florence. It has a very specific weight, and it has a very specific feature for people who travel with high-value assets." At that moment, the silent air in the house was pierced by a rhythmic, high-pitched chirping. It wasn't coming from my phone. It was coming from the bookshelf behind Michael. Michael spun around. "What the hell is that?" That's a proximity alarm, I said, my voice now completely devoid of the old man tremor, linked to the GPS tracker in the album's spine. And since the album was moved without the bypass code, it just sent a high-priority theft in progress alert to a very specialized private security firm, the kind of firm that doesn't call the police. They just show up. Michael scoffed, though he looked rattled. You're bluffing. You're a 70-year-old man in a cardigan. You don't have private security. You're right, I said, standing up. I don't, but JS does. And JS currently has a standing contract with a group of former Mossad agents who handle asset protection for the world's top collectors. They should be at the front door in approximately 60 seconds. The scar-faced man moved toward me, his hand reaching for something in his jacket. Shut him up. But before he could reach me, the front door didn't just open, it exploded inward. A flashbang grenade detonated in the hallway, filling the room with a blinding white light and a roar that felt like a physical blow to the chest. I dropped to the floor, covering my head. I heard the muffled shouts of the enforcers, the crash of furniture, and the unmistakable sound of Michael screaming in panic. I stayed down for 10 seconds. When the smoke started to clear, I looked up. The two enforcers were face down on the rug, zip-tied and silent. Jennifer was huddled in the corner, her tablet smashed. And Michael was pinned against the wall by a man in a tactical vest, a suppressed submachine gun leveled at his throat. A second man, older and wearing a sharp charcoal suit, stepped over the wreckage of my front door. He looked at me and offered a hand. "Mr. Smith," he said, his voice a calm British baritone. "Apologies for the delay. Traffic on the bridge was a nightmare." I took his hand and stood up, brushing the dust from my trousers. I looked at Michael, whose eyes were bulging with terror. He looked small. He looked like a child who had tried to steal from a dragon's hoard. "Michael," I said, stepping closer, "you wanted to know why I lived a boring and safe life? It wasn't because I couldn't afford a Tesla. It was because when you have the kind of life I had, boring is a luxury you spend millions to achieve." I turned to the man in the suit. "Take them to the secondary location and call Jessica. Tell her Amanda is safe." "Wait," Michael shrieked as they started to drag him out. "You can't do this. This is kidnapping. I have rights." I leaned in, my voice a whisper that only he could hear. "You gave up your rights when you touched my daughter's bank account, Michael. Now, you're just a disposable asset, and I'm about to initiate a full liquidation." As they hauled him away, I looked down at the penny black sitting on the table. The scotch had missed the stamp, but the protective sleeve was ruined. I sighed. It was going to be a long night, but as I reached for the album, I saw something Michael had missed. Something tucked into the back of the album that shouldn't have been there. A photo. It was a picture of Amanda. Not from today, not from the wedding. It was a photo of her at a coffee shop, taken from a distance. And she wasn't alone. She was sitting with a man I didn't recognize, a man who looked remarkably like the investor Michael had been talking to at the bar. The date on the photo was from 3 years ago. My blood went cold. This wasn't just a 6-month con. This went much deeper. I didn't know it yet, but the betrayal I had just uncovered was only the surface of a secret that would shake the very foundation of my life. "Wait," I called out to the men in the tactical vests. "Bring him back. We're not done yet." The secondary location wasn't a dungeon or a basement. It was a high-security art restoration studio I owned in the Dogpatch district, a windowless concrete box filled with the scent of turpentine and industrial-grade air filters. Under the harsh, sterile glow of the overhead LEDs, Michael and Jennifer looked significantly less like high-flying entrepreneurs and more like what they actually were: frightened grifters who had picked the wrong lock. They were zip-tied to heavy steel stools. My security team, led by the British man Julian, stood in the shadows, silent and watchful. I sat across from them, the photo I'd found in the stamp album resting on a white-gloved hand. 3 years, Michael," I said, my voice echoing in the hollow space. I held up the picture. This photo was taken at a Blue Bottle in Palo Alto, May 2023. Amanda is laughing. "You're not in the shot, but this man is. Marcus Thorne. A man I haven't seen since a very unpleasant auction in London 10 years ago." Michael tried to maintain his bravado, but his bottom lip was doing a nervous little dance. "I don't know what you're talking about. I met Amanda 6 months ago on an app. It was a coincidence." "I don't believe in coincidences, Michael. I believe in providence. And in the art world, providence is just a fancy word for a paper trail." I leaned forward, the shadows of my face lengthening under the lights. Marcus Thorne is a fixer for stolen antiquities. He's also the man who lost $4 million when I identified a fake Vermeer he was trying to slide into the National Gallery. He's had a grudge against the name JS for a long time. I looked at Jennifer. She was staring at the floor, her breathing shallow. "And you," I said. "You're not his sister. You're his handler. I ran your prints while we were in the car." Sarah Jenkins, 2 priors for wire fraud in Nevada. "You were the one who scouted Amanda, weren't you? You didn't just find her on an app. You followed her for 2 years. You waited until she was at her loneliest, after her last breakup, and you moved Michael into her orbit like a chess piece." Jennifer, or Sarah, finally looked up. The sisterly warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating mask. "So what if we did? You're the one who lied to her, James. You're the one who kept her living like a peasant while you sat on $50 million in assets. We just offered her a way out. Michael was going to give her a life you were too cheap to provide." "By stealing my house?" I asked. "By planning to put me in a state-run facility so you could liquidate my life's work. That's not a way out, Sarah. That's a harvest." The psychological tension in the room was a physical weight. Michael looked like he was going to be sick. He wasn't built for this. He was a closer, a man who used charm and designer labels to bypass people's defenses. Faced with the raw, clinical reality of Julian and his team, he was evaporating. "He told me it would be easy," Michael blurted out, his voice cracking. "Thorne, he said you were a soft touch now, that you'd gone soft for the girl. He said you'd sign anything to keep her happy." I felt a sharp, icy needle of pain in my chest. The girl. To them, Amanda was just a vulnerability, a point of entry. I didn't know it yet, but the worst was still to come. "What else did Thorne tell you?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Michael swallowed hard. He said the wedding was just the distraction. The loan on the house, the bank accounts. That was just the operating budget. He wanted the location of the midnight collection. He said you have a ledger, a list of every high-value piece you've brokered in the last 30 years that never hit the public record. He wants the names of the buyers, James. He wants to blackmail the people you sold to. I stood up so abruptly my stool screeched against the concrete. The midnight collection. It was a myth in the art world, a list of private sales I'd handled for families who wanted to keep their treasures off the tax rolls and out of the headlines. If that list went public, or fell into the hands of a man like Thorne, it wouldn't just be my life at stake. It would be a global catastrophe for the art market. "Where is Thorne?" I demanded. "I don't know," Michael shrieked. "He only contacts us through encrypted apps. We were supposed to deliver the stamp album to a locker at the ferry building tonight. That was the signal that the first phase was complete." I looked at the blue album sitting on the workbench. It was a beautiful thing, but now it felt like a ticking bomb. "Julian," I said, "get the electronics team on their phones. I want the metadata from every message they've received in the last 48 hours. And Michael," I leaned down, grabbing him by the collar of his expensive, ruined shirt, "you're going to call him. You're going to tell him the old man is being difficult, but you've got the ledger. You're going to lure him out. He'll know," Michael whimpered. "He's smarter than you think. He thinks he's playing against a retired consultant," I reminded him. "He's about to find out that JS doesn't retire. He just changes his medium." I walked out of the room, needing air. The dog patch fog was thick and salty, clinging to my skin. I pulled out my phone to check on Amanda. Jessica had sent a text. "She's asleep. She's safe. But James, we have a problem." "The loan? The $500,000? It wasn't Michael who initiated the final transfer. The IP address came from inside your house 2 hours ago, while you were in the car with the enforcers." I stared at the screen, the world tilting. I'd been in the car. Michael had been at the house, but my security team had him pinned within minutes. Who else had been in the house? I remembered the investors at the wedding, the friends, the people Michael had invited. I went back inside, my mind racing. "Michael! Who else has a key to my house? Who was there besides you and Sarah tonight?" Michael looked confused. "Nobody, just us, and the guys who brought you in." "The IP address for the transfer," I said to Julian. "Trace it back to the specific device." Julian tapped on his tablet, his face grim. After a moment, he looked up at me with an expression that made my heart stop. "It wasn't a laptop, sir," Julian said. "It was a tablet. Specifically, an iPad Pro. Serial number. It matches the one we recovered from the living room floor." "Jennifer's tablet," I said, looking at Sarah. "No," Sarah said. a strange, mocking smile spreading across her lips. I smashed mine, remember? The one your boys found, that wasn't mine. That was the gift Michael gave Amanda for the wedding. He told her it was for her lesson plans, but he'd pre-installed a remote access Trojan, except the logs show the transfer wasn't remote accessed. It was a manual entry. Someone sat in your living room, used Amanda's Face ID to unlock it, and pushed the button. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I thought of Amanda's face at the wedding. The "please help me" note, the ice-cold hand. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. "Where is my daughter?" I whispered. "She's at Jessica's," Julian said, but even as he said it, his own phone chirped. He looked at the screen, and the blood drained from his face. "Sir, the security feed from the guest suite. It's gone dark, and the perimeter alarm at the law firm just went off." I didn't wait for the rest. I was out the door and into the Audi. As I pushed the car to its limit, the streets of San Francisco blurred into a smear of neon and gray. My mind was a whirlwind of terrifying possibilities. Had Thorne taken her? Had she been taken by the investors? Or was the easy target much more dangerous than any of us realized? I reached the office building in record time. The lobby was empty, the silence deafening. I took the stairs 3 at a time, my cane forgotten in the car. When I reached the 15th floor, the door to Jessica's firm was hanging off its hinges. I burst inside. "Jessica! Amanda!" The office was a wreck. Papers were strewn everywhere. In the center of the room, Jessica was slumped over her desk, a bruise blossoming on her temple. She was alive, but unconscious, and Amanda was gone. On the desk, right next to Jessica's hand, was a single item. A piece of paper. It wasn't a note. It was a photograph. Another one. This one was from 10 years ago. It was a picture of me, standing in front of the National Gallery in London, holding a young Amanda's hand. But someone had drawn a red circle around Amanda's neck. And next to it, in neat, elegant handwriting, were 4 words that changed the entire nature of the game. "She has her mother's eyes, and her mother's debts." I collapsed into a chair, the room spinning. Her mother's debts. Amanda's mother hadn't died of breast cancer. That was the lie I'd told her to protect her. She'd been murdered by the very people I was now fighting a collateral payment for a deal I'd walked away from 20 years ago. And now, they had my daughter. But as I sat there, broken and reeling, my phone buzzed. A video file from an unknown sender. I opened it with trembling fingers. It was a live feed. Amanda was sitting in a chair, tied up, in a room that looked like a warehouse. She looked terrified. But then, she looked directly into the camera. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She mouthed 3 words. "Check the floor." I looked down, right where I was sitting. Tucked under the leg of the desk was a small silver thumb drive. I realized then that Amanda wasn't just a victim. She had been playing her own game the whole time. My daughter, the simple school teacher, had been keeping secrets that even JS didn't know. "What did you do, Amanda?" I whispered, plugging the drive into Jessica's laptop. The screen flickered to life, revealing a folder labeled "The Real Ledger." What happened next changed everything. Because it wasn't a list of art sales. It was a list of names. Names of every person who had helped Marcus Thorne destroy our family. And the first name on the list wasn't Michael Bradford. It was my neighbor, Bob Chen, the man I'd trusted with my secrets for 10 years, the man who was currently watching my house. I didn't have time to process the betrayal. I heard a floorboard creak behind me. I turned, but I was too slow. A heavy hand clamped over my mouth and the cold barrel of a gun pressed against my ear. "Hello, James," a familiar voice whispered. "I've been waiting for you to find that." It makes the ending so much more satisfying. It was Bob, and he wasn't wearing his cardigan. The cold steel of the barrel pressed against my temple was a sensation I hadn't felt in years, but it was the voice that truly paralyzed me. Bob Chen, my neighbor, my Wednesday night chess partner, the man who had sat at my kitchen table for a decade, commiserating over the rising cost of property taxes and the decline of the Richmond district. "Don't move, James," Bob whispered, his voice stripped of its usual grandfatherly tremor. It was crisp, authoritative, and utterly devoid of warmth. "And for God's sake, don't try that JS's tactical nonsense you've been brewing in your head. I know exactly how you're wired. I helped wire you." I felt the room tilt. The man who had brought me almond cookies from the Sunset District for 10 years was currently holding a suppressed Glock to my head. Every chess game we'd played, every conversation about investigative journalism, every time he'd watched Amanda grow up, it wasn't friendship. It was a long-term surveillance operation. I didn't know it yet, but the betrayal I had just uncovered was only the surface of a rot that reached back to the very day I decided to disappear. The cardigan was a nice touch, Bob, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the hammer of my heart. 10 years of wearing a costume? That's dedication even for a man like Marcus Thorne. Dedication? No, James. It was an investment, Bob said, nudging me toward the center of the office with the gun. You were the white whale, the man who vanished with the keys to the most lucrative shadow market in history. Thorne didn't just want you dead, he wanted you monetized. He needed the midnight collection, and he knew you'd never give it up to a stranger. You'd only give it up to family, or a friend. End quote. He forced me to sit in the same chair I'd occupied minutes ago. Jessica was still slumped over the desk, her breathing rhythmic but heavy. What did you do to her? I asked, gesturing to my oldest friend. A sedative, Bob said, his eyes never leaving mine. I'm not a butcher, James. I'm a professional. But Amanda, well, Amanda is a different story. She was always the variable we couldn't quite control. She's too much like you. Sharp, observant. She figured out I wasn't just a retired reporter months ago. My breath caught. She knew? She caught me in your study while you were out getting groceries last November, Bob said with a thin, cruel smile. I told her I was looking for a book you'd mentioned. She smiled, she nodded, and then she went out and bought a hidden camera disguised as a carbon monoxide detector. I didn't find it until last week. She's been recording our chess games for 6 months, James. She was building a file on me while you were busy worrying about Michael Bradford. The real ledger on the thumb drive suddenly made sense. Amanda wasn't the easy target. She was the counterintelligence officer. She had been protecting me from my own blind spots, staying in the game with Michael just to see how far the conspiracy reached. She had sacrificed her own wedding, her own reputation, and her own safety to bait the hook. What happened next changed the stakes from a robbery to a slaughter. Bob's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then looked at me with a new, sharper intensity. Thorne is impatient. The transfer Michael tried to pull was a distraction, a way to get you out of the house and isolate you. But the actual prize, the midnight collection, it isn't digital, is it, James? We've scanned every drive you own. We've intercepted every email. It's not on the cloud. If you're so smart, Bob, you should know I don't put anything of value on a server, I said. We figured that out, Bob replied. Which brings us back to the stamps. Michael thought the penny black was the prize. He's a small-minded thief. But Thorne remembers your philatel phase in the 90s. He remembers that you were obsessed with microprinting and hidden encryptions. The midnight collection, the names, the accounts, the ledger, it's not in the stamp album, it is the stamps. I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck. He was right. The collection Michael had scoffed at was more than a multi-million-dollar asset. Each rare stamp was a vessel. Using technology that was decades ahead of its time, I had embedded micro-etched data into the very fibers of the paper. It was the only copy in existence. If you know that, then you know you can't just steal them, I said. You need the decryption sequence. You need the lens array in my study. I have the lens array, Bob said. What I don't have is the final stamp, the one that acts as the cipher key. The one you keep in your pocket, James. The one you never ever leave behind. He gestured to my tuxedo jacket. I reached in slowly, my fingers brushing against the small, heavy envelope Amanda had given me on the dance floor. I had thought it was a plea for help. I had thought it was a confession. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside wasn't a note, it was a stamp. A 1918 Jenny invert, the most famous error in American philatelic history. But this wasn't a standard invert. This one had a tiny, almost invisible prick mark in the center of the airplane's fuselage. She didn't give me a note, did she? I whispered. She took the key from your desk before she left for the resort, Bob said, his voice brimming with admiration. She knew we'd be watching. She knew we'd ransack the study the moment you left. She carried the only thing that could unlock the collection right under our noses, and then she handed it to you in the middle of a crowded room where we couldn't touch you. The realization of Amanda's brilliance and her peril hit me like a tidal wave. She hadn't been screaming for help. She had been arming me. She had handed me the leverage I needed to buy her life. Where is she, Bob? I asked, my voice dropping to a growl. I have the key. You have the gun. Take me to her. That's the plan, Bob said, grabbing me by the arm and hauling me toward the door. But understand this, James. If you try to play hero, if you try to use that security team of yours, the warehouse goes up in flames with her inside. We've already rigged it. Thorn doesn't want witnesses. He only wants the list. We walked out of the office, leaving Jessica unconscious in the ruins of her life's work. The elevator ride down was the longest minute of my life. I looked at Bob, really looked at him, and saw the stranger I had invited into my heart. "Why, Bob?" I asked. "You had a life here. You had a pension. You had me." I had a front row seat to a man who lived like a monk while sitting on the wealth of kings, Bob hissed, his face contorting with a decade of suppressed envy. "You think it was easy? Watching you play modest consultant while I was struggling to pay my mortgage on a reporter's salary? You were a fake, James. You were the biggest forgery of all. You didn't deserve that life. You didn't deserve her." We stepped out into the foggy San Francisco night. A nondescript van was waiting at the curb. Two men in tactical gear, the same ones who had escorted me earlier, threw open the doors. "Get in," Bob ordered. As the van pulled away, weaving through the dark streets toward the industrial docks of the East Bay, I realized I had one final move left, but it was a move that required me to do the one thing I had promised Amanda's mother I would never do. I had to stop being a father and start being a monster. I didn't know it yet. I thought as we crossed the Bay Bridge, the city lights flickering like dying embers behind us. But by the time the sun came up, the name JS wouldn't just be a legend in the art world. It would be a warning. The van slowed as we entered a derelict warehouse district. The scent of salt and rotting wood filled the cabin. Bob pushed me out of the van, the Glock pressed firmly into the small of my back. "Inside," he commanded. The warehouse was a cavernous, echoing shell. In the center, under a single flickering halogen light, was a chair. And in that chair, tied with heavy industrial zip ties, was Amanda. Her white wedding dress was torn and stained with grease. Her face was bruised, but her eyes were wide, clear, and fixed on me. "Dad!" she cried out, her voice echoing off the corrugated steel walls. "Shut up!" a voice boomed from the shadows. A man stepped into the light, Marcus Thorne. He looked exactly as I remembered him, polished, silver-haired, and possessed of the kind of effortless evil that only comes with absolute wealth. He was holding a tablet, the screen glowing with a map of the Richmond property. "James," Thorne said, a thin smile touching his lips. "You look terrible. Retirement hasn't been kind to you." "Let her go, Marcus," I said, holding up the small envelope with the Jenny invert. "You have what you came for. The key is here. The collection is in your possession. There's no reason to keep her." Thorne laughed, a dry, melodic sound. "There's every reason, James. You see, the Midnight Collection isn't just a list of names. It's a list of sins. And sins require a sacrifice. You spent 15 years trying to bury the man you were. You thought you could just walk away from the debts you owed the world?" He walked over to Amanda, trailing a finger down her cheek. She flinched, but didn't look away. "The wedding was Michael's idea," Thorne continued. "A bit gauche, I'll admit, but it served its purpose. It broke your guard. It made you vulnerable. And now, I'm going to watch you dismantle your own legacy just to save a girl who was never as innocent as you thought." He looked at Bob. "Check the stamp. If it's the real key, kill the father, keep the girl. She's far more useful as a bargaining chip with the families on the list." Bob stepped forward, reaching for the envelope. This was it, the moment where the game reached its terminal velocity. But as Bob's hand touched the paper, I felt a familiar vibration in my pocket. My burner phone. A single rhythmic pulse. Julian, my security lead. He had found the warehouse. He was in position. But he wasn't waiting for my signal. He was waiting for Amanda's. I looked at my daughter. She shifted her foot slightly, her heel clicking against the concrete floor in a specific, rhythmic pattern. SOS. But not in Morse code. It was a sequence we had practiced when she was 10 years old, a sequence used by art couriers to signal a hot extraction. What happened next changed the air in the room. Amanda didn't wait for me to act. She leaned forward, her weight shifting, and slammed her head into Thorne's midsection. At the same time, the skylights above us shattered in a rain of glass. "Now!" I screamed. I didn't reach for the gun. I reached for the one thing Thorne had forgotten I possessed: knowledge. "The stamp is a decoy, Bob," I shouted as the room erupted into gunfire and chaos. "The real key is in the ink. Don't let it touch the air." Bob froze, his greed overriding his training for a split second. He looked down at the stamp in his hand, and in that second, I lunged. I didn't know if we would make it out of that warehouse alive, but as I tackled the man who had been my friend for a decade, I saw Amanda rolling behind a stack of crates, her eyes burning with a fire I had never seen before. My daughter wasn't just a survivor, she was a weapon. And Marcus Thorne was about to find out that the Smith family had more secrets than just a collection of old stamps. The air in the warehouse was instantly replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of cordite and the crystalline roar of shattering glass. It's a sound you never forget, the way the world sounds when the safety of a normal life is permanently ripped away. I hit the concrete hard, my shoulder screaming as I drove my weight into Bob. He wasn't the frail neighbor I had played chess with. He was solid, a man who had kept his body as sharp as his lies. We tumbled into the darkness just as the first volley of suppressed gunfire chewed through the wooden crates where Amanda had been seconds before. I didn't know it yet, but this was the moment James Smith died, and the man I had spent 15 years trying to bury finally took the wheel. "You're a dead man, James," Bob hissed, his hand fumbling for the Glock I'd knocked loose. We scrambled in the dirt and oil of the warehouse floor, two old men fighting with the desperate, ugly strength of rivals who had shared too many meals together. I slammed my elbow into his throat, hearing a satisfying gag, and rolled toward the shadows. My eyes were locked on the silhouette of Marcus Thorne. He was retreating toward the rear loading dock, his tactical team forming a human shield around him. He still had the stamp album, the one Michael had stolen. He had the list, or so he thought. The chaos was a symphony of precision. Julian's team moved like smoke, their muzzle flashes illuminating the warehouse in strobes of violent white. I saw Amanda. She had used the distraction to grab a shard of glass from the floor, frantically sawing at the zip ties on her wrists. She wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. She looked at me through the haze of dust and smoke, and for a heartbeat, I didn't see my little girl. I saw her mother. I saw the same defiant, terrifying fire that had once burned in the eyes of the woman who had truly built the JS empire. I reached Amanda just as her ties snapped. I pulled her behind a rusted industrial generator, shielding her with my body. "Are you hurt?" I gasped, my lungs burning. "I'm fine, Dad," she whispered, her voice like cold steel. She reached into the bodice of her torn wedding dress and pulled out a small crumpled piece of paper. It was the penny black, the real one. The one Michael and Thorne thought they had was a high-fidelity decoy I'd prepared years ago for just such an occasion. I swapped them when Michael was bragging to Jennifer in the kitchen. He's so arrogant he didn't even check the watermark. I stared at her, stunned. My daughter hadn't just been a witness. She had been the architect of our survival. But there was no time for pride. A bullet sparked off the generator inches from my head. "Julian!" "Cover the north exit," I roared, my voice echoing with an authority that stopped the breath of every man in that room. "Thorne has the decoy, let him run, he needs to think he won." What happened next was a blur of tactical retreat and cold realization. Thorne's team laid down a wall of fire, escaping into the fog of the East Bay in a fleet of black Suburbans. Julian's men didn't pursue, they knew the plan. But as the sound of engines faded, the warehouse fell into a heavy, ringing silence. Bob was gone too. He'd slipped into the darkness during the exchange, leaving behind nothing but a smear of blood and the bitter taste of a decade-long betrayal. I sat on the cold floor, pulling Amanda into a hug. We were alive, but the cost was rising. I looked around the derelict space, the reality of my life's work, the Midnight Collection, now a target on our backs. "He said something about Mom," Amanda whispered into my chest. "He said she had debts, that she didn't die of cancer. Dad, tell me the truth, please." I closed my eyes, the weight of 15 years of lies finally crushing me. I had hit rock bottom. I had lost my home, my friend, my peace, and now, the curated image of the father I wanted to be. I pulled back, looking into her eyes, the eyes that Thorne said were a payment. "Your mother was the real JS, Amanda," I said, the words feeling like glass in my throat. "I was just the face, the consultant. She was the one who outmaneuvered the syndicates, the one who built the list. She didn't have debts to Thorne. She had leverage over him. She was going to expose his entire laundering operation. He didn't just kill her. He staged it to look like an illness so I wouldn't go to the police. He told me if I ever used the list, if I ever stepped back into the light, he'd finish what he started with you." The silence that followed was more painful than the gunfire. Amanda didn't pull away. She didn't yell. She just nodded, a slow, methodical movement. "So he's been waiting," she said. "Waiting for you to get old. Waiting for me to be the weak link." "Yes," I said, and he used Michael Bradford to find the crack in the door. I didn't know it then, but the easy target Michael thought he'd found was about to become the most expensive mistake of his life. We returned to a safe house in Seacliff, a fortress disguised as a Mediterranean villa owned by a shell company Michael could never have traced. Julian and his team were already scrubbing the digital footprints of the night's events. Jessica was there, a bandage on her head, her eyes sharp with a lawyer's thirst for retribution. "They have the decoy album," Julian reported, standing by a wall of monitors. "Thorne is at a private estate in Woodside. He's currently trying to decrypt the microdots on the decoy stamps. Our tech team is feeding him ghost data. It'll keep him busy for about 6 hours before he realizes he's looking at a collection of nursery rhymes and middle fingers." I stood by the window, watching the whitecaps of the Pacific. I felt old, but for the first time in years, I felt focused. The boring and safe James Smith was gone. In his place was a man who had nothing left to lose but the daughter who had proven herself more capable than he ever dreamed. "Jessica," I said, not turning around. "I want the full JS network activated. I want every gallery, every auction house, and every private collector who owes me a favor to hear one thing: Marcus Thorne is toxic. I want his assets frozen, his reputations burned, and his buyers terrified. If they so much as whisper his name, I want their own legacies questioned." "And what about Michael and Jennifer?" Amanda asked. She was sitting at a mahogany table, cleaning a smudge of grease from the real penny black. She looked like a queen preparing her crown. "Michael is a pawn," I said. "But pawns can be sacrificed to take the king. He's currently in a holding cell at one of Julian's facilities. He thinks he's going to jail. He doesn't realize that jail would be a mercy." I walked over to her, placing my hand on her shoulder. "You said you wanted to help. You said you wanted justice. But justice in our world isn't a courtroom, Amanda. It's a total erasure. Are you ready for that?" She looked up at me, and I saw at the final transition. The school teacher was gone. The easy target had been replaced by a partner. "I've been ready since the first dance at the wedding, Dad. I want them to feel exactly what I felt when I realized my entire life was a lie. I want them to watch their world disappear piece by piece." I didn't know it yet, but the revenge plan we were about to launch would make the Napa Valley wedding look like a playground dispute. "Step 1, I said, turning to the monitors. "We let the investors know that Michael Bradford's fintech startup was never a business. It was a front for Thorne's laundered art money. And since the ledger is now stolen, those investors are about to become the primary targets of a global IRS and Interpol sting. By morning, every person Michael invited to that wedding will be looking for his head." "And Jennifer?" Jessica asked. "Sarah Jenkins," I corrected. "She likes wire fraud. Let's give her the ultimate score. We're going to leak a secret account to her, one that supposedly contains the liquidated assets of the Midnight Collection. We'll let her greed do the work for us. She'll steal from Thorne to save herself, and Thorne doesn't forgive thieves." The open loop was set. The betrayal had become a visible, bleeding wound. And now, the manipulation was flowing back toward the source. But as we began to coordinate the attack, a final message flickered onto Julian's screen. It was an image from my home in the Richmond. The house was on fire. The modest life I had built was being incinerated in real time. And standing in front of the flames, silhouetted by the orange glow, was Bob. He was holding a chess piece, the White King. He looked directly into the security camera and made a cutting motion across his throat. "He's not going to Woodside with Thorne." I realized, a chill running down my spine. "He's coming for us, personally." I looked at Amanda. She didn't flinch. She just reached for the burner phone. "Let him come," she said. "I've already recorded his confession from the warehouse. I sent it to his old editor at the Chronicle 10 minutes ago. If we're going down, Bob Chen is going to be the front page story of the decade." The game had shifted again. It wasn't just about money or art anymore. It was a race to see who would be the last one standing when the smoke cleared. I realized then that the final twist wasn't going to be about the stamps or the ledger. It was going to be about what was left of our souls when the fire finally went out. "Prepare the car," I told Julian. "We're not waiting for them to find us. We're going to the one place Thorne thinks he's safe. We're going to Woodside. And we're bringing the fire with us." What happened next changed the history of the San Francisco art world forever. But in that moment, all I could think about was the look on Michael Bradford's face when he realized that the old man he tried to cage was the one who held the key to his hell. The drive to Woodside was a blur of high-speed geometry and cold, calculated fury. I sat in the back of the Audi, my eyes fixed on the tablet Julian had mounted to the headrest. The image of my home, the place where I'd tucked Amanda into bed for 20 years, the place where we'd celebrated every birthday and mourned her mother in silence, was a smoldering pyre. The orange flames licked the night sky of the Richmond, turning my past into ash. I didn't know it yet, but that fire was the final thing I needed to lose to become truly dangerous. As long as that house stood, I was James the father. Now, with the roof caving in, I was only JS. He thinks he's burning my legacy, I whispered, the light of the screen reflecting in my eyes. He doesn't realize he's just clearing the field. Amanda sat beside me, her hand resting on the real penny black, which was now tucked into a secure, lead-lined transport case. She hadn't looked at the footage of the fire once. She was staring out the window at the dark silhouette of the Santa Cruz Mountains. "Dad," she said, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. "The investors Michael brought to the wedding, they weren't just laundries for Thorne. I've been looking through the data on the thumb drive. 2 of them are board members for the very nursing home Michael was trying to put you in." The depth of the conspiracy was breathtaking. It wasn't just a robbery, it was an ecosystem. They had a vertical supply chain for destroying lives. One group to isolate the victim, one to forge the documents, and one to provide the facility where the victim would eventually disappear while they picked the bones clean. "Then we start the liquidation there," I said. I turned to Julian. "Execute the Black Tuesday protocol. Every one of those board members. I want their personal tax returns leaked to the SEC. I want the donations they received from Thorne's shell companies flagged as terror financing. If they're in the business of caging people, let's see how they like a cell with a steel door." Julian nodded, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "Done. The first wave of subpoenas will hit their lawyers' inboxes by 4 a.m. By the time they wake up, their personal assets will be as frozen as a San Francisco summer." We were moving at 80 miles per hour through the Silicon Valley corridor, the heart of the tech world that Michael had tried to use as his shield. But we weren't using disruptive tech. We were using old world pressure. "Step 2, I continued. "Sarah Jenkins, tell her the transfer of the Midnight Collection funds is pending her authorization. She's currently hiding in a motel in San Mateo. She thinks she's the only one with the access code. Tell her if she doesn't move the money to her private Cayman's account in the next 20 minutes, Thorne will lock her out." "You're baiting her to steal from him," Amanda noted. "I'm baiting her to sign her own death warrant," I replied. "Thorne's security protocols are set to alert him the moment that specific account is accessed. He'll see her betrayal in real time. He'll think his handler has gone rogue. He'll stop looking for us and start looking for her." I watched as the icons on Julian's screen shifted. Sarah had taken the bait. Greed is a predictable compass. It always points toward the cliff. Within minutes, Thorne's encrypted network was lighting up with frantic commands. The hunter was being distracted by his own hounds. We reached the outskirts of Woodside, an area where the driveways are half a mile long, and the neighbors are tech billionaires and venture capital royalty. This was Thorne's territory, a sprawling, 20-acre estate hidden behind a 10-foot stone wall and a sophisticated biometric gate. But I knew this house. I had consulted on the security for the previous owner, a reclusive impressionist collector, years ago. I knew that for all the cameras and lasers, there was a drainage culvert near the southern perimeter that hadn't been updated since the 1970s. "Julian, drop us here," I said as we approached a dark stretch of the perimeter wall. "You and your team take the main gate. Make as much noise as possible. Flashbangs, sirens, the whole federal raid theater. Give Thorne a reason to look at his front monitors." "And you, sir?" Julian asked. "I'm going in through the back," I said, "with the key." I looked at Amanda. "Stay in the car. If things go wrong, Julian's men have instructions to get you to the airport. There's a plane waiting in San Jose." Amanda looked at me, and for the first time that night, a small, sad smile touched her lips. "Dad, after everything I've done tonight, you really think I'm going to sit in the car and wait for a flight?" She held up the penny black case. "You need the key to get into his private vault, and I'm the only one who knows the final sequence of the encryption. You taught me well, remember? The eyes of the daughter see what the father tries to hide." I realized then that she was right. I couldn't protect her by leaving her behind anymore. The only way through was together. We slipped out of the car and into the damp, cold grass. The scent of eucalyptus and expensive mulch was thick in the air. We moved through the shadows of the oaks, the distant sound of Julian's raid starting to echo from the front of the estate. Pop, 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 the sound of diversionary charges. We reached the culvert. It was tight, wet, and smelled of stagnant water, but it led directly into the crawlspace beneath Thorne's library. We emerged 10 minutes later, covered in grit and adrenaline, inside the heart of the fortress. The library was a temple to stolen history. The walls were lined with illuminated manuscripts, rare scrolls, and paintings that the world thought had been lost in the fires of World War II. In the center of the room, Marcus Thorne was hunched over a desk, his face bathed in the blue light of a dozen monitors. He was frantically typing, trying to stop the financial bleeding we'd initiated. "It's not working, Marcus," I said, stepping out of the shadows. Thorne spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for a drawer in the desk. "Don't," I warned, my voice like a whip. "Julian's team is currently dismantling your security detail at the front gate. Your accounts are being drained by your own sister, and your investors are currently being fitted for orange jumpsuits. You're alone." Thorne looked from me to Amanda. His eyes lingered on the transport case in her hand. You actually came here? To my house? "You burned mine," I said. "I thought it was only fair to return the favor." "The penny black," Thorne hissed, his eyes wide with a desperate hunger. "Give it to me, James. I can stop the warrants. I can call off the people I sent after your friend. I can make this go away." "You can't make anything go away anymore," Amanda said, stepping forward. She opened the case, revealing the stamp. "You wanted the Midnight Collection? You wanted the sins of the world's elite? Here they are. But there's something you didn't know about the final stamp, Marcus." I didn't know what she was doing. I watched as she held the stamp up to the light of his monitors. "The microprinting isn't just data," she said. "It's a trigger. My mother didn't just build a list of sins to blackmail people. She built a dead man's switch. If the stamps are scanned without the proper biometric handshake, the one only her bloodline can provide, it doesn't just display the names. It broadcasts them." Thorne's face went pale. "What?" "In approximately 60 seconds, Amanda continued, her voice steady and clinical. "Every major news outlet in the world, every tax authority, and every person on that list is going to receive a file. It contains the evidence of your laundering, the locations of every stolen piece in this room, and the recording of your confession from the warehouse tonight." "You're lying," Thorne screamed, lunging for her. I intercepted him, my fist connecting with his jaw with a satisfying crack. He slumped back against his desk, the blue light making him look like a ghost. "She's not lying, Marcus," I said, leaning over him. "She has her mother's eyes. And her mother's talent for the long game." But as the countdown on the monitor hit 0, a sound echoed through the library that made my blood freeze, slow, rhythmic clapping. From the darkened balcony above us, a figure emerged. It wasn't Bob, it wasn't one of Thorne's guards. It was Michael Bradford. He was holding a tablet of his own, and he was smiling the same wide, charming, fraudulent smile he'd used at the dinner table. But his eyes were different. They were sharp, cold, and possessed of a terrifying clarity. "Beautifully played, Amanda," Michael said, leaning over the railing. "Truly, the dead man's switch was a masterstroke. I didn't think you had it in you." I stared at him. "Michael, how did you get out?" "I never went in, James," Michael said, tossing a set of keys onto the library floor. They were Julian's keys. "You see, Julian is a very expensive man, but I'm a very rich one. I've been funding his security firm for 3 years. He didn't find you because of a GPS tracker in an album. He found you because I told him where to look." The world tilted once more. The reversal was total. "Thorne was the distraction," Michael explained, walking down the stairs with the casual grace of a man who owned the room. "He's an old-school dinosaur. He wanted the list to blackmail people. How quaint. I don't want to blackmail the elite, James. I want to replace them." He looked at the penny black in Amanda's hand. "The broadcast you just initiated, it didn't go to the news outlets. It went to my server. I've spent the last hour rerouting the dead man's switch to a private cloud. Now, I have the list. I have the evidence. And I have the only 2 people who can authenticate it." He looked at me, his smile broadening. "You thought I was the pawn. But in the fintech world, James, we don't play chess. We play capture the flag. And I just took yours." I looked at Amanda. She was staring at Michael, her face a mask of shock. "What about Bob?" I asked. "Bob was a true believer," Michael said with a shrug. "He really hated you. But he was too emotional. He wanted to burn your house. I wanted to burn your world. I'm the one who told him where to find the accelerant." Michael reached the bottom of the stairs and held out his hand. "The stamp, Amanda. Give it to me. And maybe I'll let your father live long enough to see what I do with his legacy." But as Michael stepped toward her, the library doors didn't just open, they were blown off their hinges by a massive, concussive blast. A figure stepped through the smoke. He was charred, bleeding, and his clothes were tattered. He was holding a jagged piece of the White King from our chess set. It was Bob, and he looked like he'd crawled out of hell. "Nobody," Bob rasped, his eyes fixed on Michael. "Nobody gets his legacy but me." He lunged not at me, but at Michael. In the chaos that followed, I grabbed Amanda and the stamp. We were caught between 3 generations of monsters, and the house was starting to fill with the sound of sirens, real ones this time. I didn't know it then, but the final twist wasn't about who held the list. It was about who was willing to let it go. "The vault! Amanda!" I shouted over the roar of the fire starting to spread from the blast. "The vault has a separate exit! Move!" As we ran, I looked back one last time. Bob and Michael were locked in a death grip on the floor, the investor and the neighbor tearing each other apart in the ruins of a billionaire's library. We reached the vault door, but as I punched in the code, I realized the final, most devastating truth of all. The vault wasn't empty. I stopped dead, my hand hovering over the keypad. "Dad, what is it?" Amanda cried. "The vault," I whispered, staring at the internal security monitor. "It's not for art, Amanda. Look." Inside the vault, sitting on a simple wooden chair, was a woman. She was older, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes, they were the eyes I'd been seeing in my dreams for 15 years. My wife, Amanda's mother. She wasn't dead. She was the one who had been running the midnight collection from inside Thorne's house the whole time. And she was looking directly into the camera, a finger pressed to her lips. "Don't come in," she mouthed. "It's a trap." The cliffhanger wasn't just a threat. It was a revelation that threatened to destroy the very reason I had spent 15 years fighting. My daughter's mother was the ultimate architect of the nightmare. I stood paralyzed, my fingers hovering over the keypad like they were made of lead. The screen was grainy, the black and white feed flickering with the interference from the fire raging in the library, but there was no mistaking the woman on the monitor. Elena, my wife, the woman I had buried 15 years ago in a closed casket ceremony that had nearly destroyed my soul. She looked older, her face etched with the silent toll of a decade and a half in the shadows, but her eyes held that same fierce, terrifying intelligence that had once made her the most feared name in the global art trade. "Dad, what's wrong? Open it!" Amanda screamed, her voice competing with the roar of the flames and the distant sound of breaking glass. "I didn't open it. I couldn't." "She's inside, Amanda," I whispered. "Your mother, she's in the vault." Amanda's face went white. She lunged for the monitor, her eyes widening as she saw the woman on the screen. "Mom?" The word was a broken sob. She reached for the keypad, but I caught her hand. She said, "It's a trap," I warned. "Look at the way she's sitting. Look at her hands." Elena wasn't just sitting. She was holding a dead man's switch of her own, a small, silver detonator. She wasn't a prisoner. She was the final safeguard. She had been the one keeping the Midnight Collection out of Thorne's reach from the inside, a ghost in the machine of his own house. She had traded her life, her motherhood, and her identity to be the sentinel that kept the predators away from us. "James." Elena's voice suddenly crackled through the vault's intercom, thin and distorted but unmistakably hers. "Don't come in. If you open that door, the biometric lock triggers a thermite charge in the floor. The collection, the evidence, and everyone in this room will be vaporized. Thorne didn't build this to keep people out. He built it to keep the secrets in." "Mom, please," Amanda cried, leaning toward the speaker. "We're here. We can get you out." "No, sweetheart." Elena's voice softened, and I could hear the heartbreak of 15 years in that single breath. "The only way to end this, the only way to keep you safe is to let the fire have it all. The JS name, the Midnight Collection, the debts, they all have to burn. As long as the list exists, you will always be targets. Michael, Bob, Thorne. There will always be another legacy eater waiting in the tall grass." The library doors behind us buckled. Michael and Bob had stopped fighting each other long enough to realize the prize was slipping away. They were shoulder to shoulder now, a monstrous alliance of greed, throwing their weight against the reinforced oak. "Open the door, James." Bob's voice roared from the smoke. "I know you're in there. I know the key. Give me the collection and I'll let you both walk." "He's lying, Dad," Amanda said, her voice suddenly calming. She looked at the penny black in her hand, then at the monitor where her mother sat waiting for the end. She looked at me and I saw the wisdom I had tried so hard to teach her finally take root. She wasn't a school teacher or a victim anymore. She was the legacy. The greatest wealth isn't what we collect, Amanda whispered, repeating the words I'd told her when she was 6 years old. It's what we're willing to walk away from, I finished. I looked at the monitor. Elena, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I let him get this close. You loved her, James, Elena replied. That was the only thing I couldn't protect her from. Now, go. The service elevator behind the tapestry in the hallway. It leads to the wine cellar. There's an old tunnel. Get her out of here. I'm not leaving you again, I said. You're not leaving me, Elena said, a ghostly smile touching her lips. I was never really there. I died 15 years ago to give you a quiet life. Don't let that sacrifice be for nothing. End the game, James. I looked at Amanda. She nodded, her eyes streaming with tears but her hands steady. She took the penny black, the real one, the key to the world's most dangerous secrets, and she didn't tuck it away. She walked to the center of the library, where the fire was already beginning to eat the velvet curtains. Amanda, no, Michael screamed as he finally burst through the doors, his face a mask of desperation. She didn't hesitate. She tossed the stamp into the heart of the flames. We watched as the 1,840 paper, the ink that held the sins of kings and billionaires, curled and vanished into a cinder. The list is gone, Michael, Amanda said, her voice ringing out over the roar of the inferno. The JS name is dead. There's nothing left to steal. Michael let out a primal scream of rage, lunging toward the fire as if he could reach into the embers and pull back his fortune. Bob stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the empty space where a decade of his envy had just turned to smoke. In that moment, they weren't villains, they were pathetic. They had spent their lives chasing a ghost, and the ghost had finally vanished. Go! I grabbed Amanda's arm, dragging her toward the hidden elevator. As the doors closed, I looked back. Thorne had crawled into the room, his eyes wide with horror as he realized his entire empire was being deconstructed by a girl in a ruined wedding dress. The library was a vortex of heat and light, and on the monitor, still visible through the smoke, Elena blew a final kiss toward the camera. The explosion wasn't a roar. It was a deep, structural thud that shook the earth. The vault's thermite charge had triggered, collapsing the library and the secrets within it into a molten pit. We emerged into the cool night air of the Woodside Hills, miles from the main house. We stood on a ridge, watching as the Thorne estate became a beacon of orange light against the dark forest. The sirens were everywhere now, fire trucks, police, federal agents. The world would wake up to the news of a tragic fire at the home of a billionaire philanthropist. They would find the remains of Marcus Thorne, Michael Bradford, and Bob Chen. They would find the charred remnants of a stolen history, but they would never find the Midnight Collection, and they would never find JS. A week later, we sat on a bench in Golden Gate Park. The fog was rolling in, cold and familiar. I was wearing my old cardigan. Amanda was in a simple sweater, a sketchbook in her lap. We looked like any other father and daughter enjoying a quiet afternoon. The news had been a whirlwind. Michael Bradford's fintech empire had been exposed as a massive Ponzi scheme linked to international art laundering. Jennifer Sarah Jenkins had been arrested at the border trying to cross into Mexico with a suitcase full of forged bonds. The nursing home board members were all under federal indictment. The easy target had turned out to be the catalyst for the total destruction of a criminal network that had existed for 40 years. What now, Dad? Amanda asked, sketching the outline of a cypress tree. Now, I said, leaning back and closing my eyes. We live, truly live. No more secrets, no more consulting, just us. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, worn piece of paper. It wasn't a stamp. It was a photo of the three of us, James, Elena, and a 3-year-old Amanda taken on a beach in Monterey before the world went dark. I kept one thing, I whispered. Amanda looked at the photo, her eyes softening. It's the only thing that was ever worth anything anyway. I didn't know it then, but the moral of the story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about the brilliance of the con or the satisfaction of seeing the bad guys fall. It was about the fact that true wisdom isn't found in what you own, but in who you protect. Michael Bradford thought he was a millionaire because he had a Tesla and a fake Patek. He was the poorest man I'd ever met. I watched a young couple walk by, the man laughing and the woman looking at him with the same trusting eyes Amanda had once had. I hoped for their sake that he was exactly who he said he was. But if he wasn't, I knew there would be a father somewhere, sitting in a modest house, watching and waiting. Because the world is full of legacy eaters. But it's also full of ghosts who will do anything to keep the light burning for the people they love. Let's go home, sweetheart, I said, standing up and reaching for my cane. "We don't have a home, Dad," she reminded me, a small, resilient smile on her face. "It burned down, remember?" I looked at her, strong, wise, and free. I tucked the photo into my pocket and started walking toward the car. "We have each other, Amanda," I said. "And in my experience, that's the only foundation that never cracks." The family revenge was complete, but it hadn't ended in blood or bitterness. It had ended in the only thing that matters, the truth. And as we drove away from the park, leaving the legends of JS and the Midnight Collection in the ash of the Woodside Hills, I finally felt like the man I had always wanted to be. Just a father, and that was more than enough.